Now, that's it. We'll get to the talk. I will stop sharing my screen, and I would like to, yeah, let's get this talk underway. So I will be your host today, the moderator. We've got a list of questions, and I would love to introduce our speakers today. So we've got Matt Woodruff from Bison Technologies. We've got Doji Jakuma from Heartland, and we've got Stephen Vincent, who I want to give everybody. Stephen is one of our, I think, the co-organizer of OKC Web Devs as well. So I want to give everybody a chance to talk about themselves, to say who they are. Let's start with Matt and go Doji and Stephen.
Hey guys, Matt Woodruff. I'm a full stack developer at Bison Technologies. I'm the lead engineer at a local startup called Maeda. I've been working in the IT field roughly for 10 years or so. Been developing for a little over around 3 years. So that's me. Doji.
Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Also, Doji and I went on the cat ears together.
Yeah. Yes, I have the cat ears because Aaron was rocking the cat ears, so I put mine on too. My name is Doji Jakuma. I am a currently UX designer at Heartland. We'll be changing very soon cloud engineering as of tomorrow. Thank you. I've done lots of different roles in tech since 2008, and can talk on various subjects. Don't pretend to be an expert about any of it because you can never really become an expert. You're always learning something at some point in time.
Here.
Steven?
I'm Steven Vincent. Most of you guys already know me. I am a contract developer. Honestly, right now, I don't really have a fancy title. I wear many hats as of the past 3 years, and I love being a contractor. I will say that my unique perspective is that I went to art school, got a degree, did nothing with it, went back to school, got a computer science degree, and I've been developing ever since. So I decided a few years ago to make a jump to contracting because I love working on all technology and I don't enjoy sitting still. And so being a contractor, I get to work on amazing projects and meet some incredible people. So I've actually done talks with some of the people I've met. I've worked with a lot of the companies here in the metro. I'm working with a company right now in Silicon Valley. It's been enjoyable. It is not easy all the time, but I love what I do. So, and I've known everyone on this panel for many years, and I'm grateful to be able to talk with everyone about the stuff that I do every day. So.
All right. Well, welcome everybody, and you all very likely know me, just like you know Stephen. I'll be your host today. I'm Aaron Kraus, and I am a software engineer at Clever, which is where we just talked about potentially meeting in March. I do a lot of stuff there. We are a software consultancy, so we build web applications and mobile applications, desktop apps, dev operations type stuff, a lot of things. But suffice it to say that if you or your company need any help with anything software related, contact us. We work with national clients, but we love working locally because that's just always special. So let's hop into the talk. So our topic today is going to be starting and replacing production software, and the big questions that we want to answer are going to revolve around how do we do this in the most efficient, optimal way. We've all been in that situation where we have to make a big change. It could be, a big new workflow that we're doing on a piece of software. It could be updating an old workflow, whatever it is. It is challenging to uproot existing workflows, even if you're adding a new workflow, and make a new workflow work there. So, and it doesn't matter if you're a 5-person company or a 5,000-person company. These problems are still there. So that's kind of the topic today. And in Twitch, we want to encourage anyone to ask questions. We'll be monitoring that. We'll kind of we have a Q&A section at the end, but if it makes sense to ask anything during the talk, if there's a particular question you want to hit on, please do, and we'll get it in there. But kind of starting off with the process, no matter what happens when you're thinking about implementing this change, you have to do quite a bit of research. You don't ever want to just jump in and start coding. So the first question will be, whenever you are presented with this change, what kind of research do you all do in your disciplines to kind of go about this in the right way? And let's start off with Doji, but you're more than welcome to hand it off as you want to.
Sure. So if you're working with software, and this is specifically talking about workflows, is that correct, or is it complete replacement of software?
So honestly, the big goal is just uprooting something and making a change. Like fundamentally, we're just talking about software here. So either one, new workflow or uprooting a new workflow that has to fit into an existing piece of software, or updating a key workflow that is going to cause ripple effects down the road.
Okay. So just really quick to dive into it from my perspective, I've been at lots of companies, and there's something called legacy software. And basically, the long and short of it is legacy software is any software that's in production that you need for your company to run. So once you've made it and it's in production, it's pretty much legacy software. It doesn't always mean it's old. It can be software that wasn't properly designed or anything like that. And lots of corporations have to move quickly. You have to move quickly to keep up with customer demands, what the business has, things like that. So usually what happens for me is I tend to use a lot of the principles that are laid out in the book working with legacy software, which is you find the seams in the software and you try and see what parts of the software are doing what's been properly defined, refactor that using safe refactoring methods just to kind of see like, what is it? How does it exist? And can I change it without breaking things safely? And then once you understand the seams and what you can and cannot break, then it's easier to jump in and go ahead and start a replacement plan from there. So for me, it's a little bit of some action. So there's action work there instead of the research, but the action work is trying to improve the environment with the intention of research. And then after that, coming up with a plan and talking with coworkers about how long is it going to take? What's going to happen? What are some potential pitfalls we can fall into, etc. That's usually where I would start. Anyone else?
I will say, to comment on something you said, I like the use of using seams. I think that's a beautiful analogy, because that is by far people who the word legacy software has always like made me cringe, and like the older I get, the more I'm like, oh no, like, because legacy is not necessarily indicative to enterprise, right? Like sometimes legacy could be that child that you don't want to ever touch, and there's only like one person, like one developer that knows how to work on it, and they'll never leave the company because they can't afford to lose that person. But finding those seams is like, it is the most crucial and most difficult part of that process, because sometimes it could be 20 years old and you don't know what it does anymore. You just know it's like this little black box, and that's scary for a developer. And it's like, I call it Plinko, right? Like sometimes you just have to drop something in there, like a piece of data, and find out what happens to it. And that is my part of the research that I'm really good at that, because that's all I have to do now for 3 years as a contractor. No one wants to spin up a contractor because when they leave that knowledge, with that knowledge. So it's like, throw them to the wolves and fend for yourself. But like, I play Plinko for a living, right? Like, I'm like, whoa, what's this software? And I relate to a lot of QA testers by doing a lot of, exploratory testing. And I think that's underrated as a form of research. People hype on documentation, but really, like, seeing is believing. And sometimes, like, you go, well, what's this supposed to do, right? And then you form those questions, and then you go to someone and ask them, because now you've seen something and you have at least a little bit of the knowledge, and then you can find an expert. I know that's one of those taboo things. Like, I'm not an expert, I just work on it a lot. Don't come to me for all your questions. But yeah, I think I would definitely say the first thing is what am I replacing, right? Like, I have to kind of, if I'm not one of those people, if I'm not that expert that works on that software, I definitely want to get my hands on it. So that way, at least I have a side-by-side comparison or something, granted, that's because everyone says they have everything documented, but it is my experience that almost nothing is documented. So that is a challenge to the entire industry, not just people I've worked with, me included.
Yeah, I can add some to that. I like the black box analogy. So depending on like the scope and complexity of this refactor that you're doing, or rewrite even, somewhere that I like to start is by looking at their current test coverage, mainly integration tests. And I dig into, that's kind of how I abstract the business logic from the black box, right? And then I look at inputs and I look at outputs. And so if there is good test coverage and everything is solid, then when I'm going through and refactoring, I'll look at the inputs and the outputs and ensure they're the same. But if it's not, then I'll consider, if I'm rewriting a backend, I'll write a series of integration tests, and then after I've rewritten it, I'll run the same tests with the same inputs and ensure that I get the same outputs. And if I was refactoring a front end, I'd write a series of end-to-end tests, that test the business logic if they're not already there. And I would lean heavily on that approach.
Absolutely. TDD is like that's flawless. A flawless execution of that. I love that.
Yeah, a lot of documentation can be extracted from tests if they were written with that intention, and that's that's my approach.
What about auto docs? Like, have you used those for your test coverage and for your APIs and stuff?
I've never used auto docs, but that does sound interesting.
They're the new hotness now, and I don't have any experience either, so I was kind of hoping you did. But I know they're the new hotness, and I'm like, I should know more about them.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's kind of keep going on the testing side here. So, in an ideal situation, you're working on a project that has good test coverage, and good is relative to whatever your organization needs. Now, I know we've all worked on those projects that don't have that optimal level of test coverage. So, Matt, kind of following back up with you here, assuming you've worked on a project that you're making updates to that would have tests versus wouldn't have tests, or at least not ideal level of tests, how has your experience differed there?
We write a ton of tests where I'm currently at. So I've been lucky in that if I do want to do a sweeping refactor, we have plenty of test coverage. But if we didn't, I would probably spend a fair amount of my focus, instead of just researching the business logic, I would be writing, end-to-end tests or integration tests of some sort. And so that I have that in my arsenal for, the refactor. And then I can be a little less concerned with breaking things as I'm refactoring. And like Doji said, I would look for segments or boundaries. And, that's why when you're writing startup software, it's always a good idea to, think of it like it's something that's going to be taken apart and dissected and reassembled later. And so like on the back end, following SOA is good practice. Because then later, if you want to break this core API out into microservices, you can do so rather easily. Front end, following architectural patterns to manage state well, like Flux. Oftentimes, I'll use that to segment and break out my business logic. There shouldn't be a ton of business logic on the front end, but sometimes there is. And so I'll use something like Redux or Vuex and Vue. And, I'll segment all my business logic to the actions in either of those. And then when I do a sweeping refactor, my logic is nice and safe and happy. And so whenever I actually start rewriting it in whatever framework technology I'm using, I don't have to be as worried about, the business logic. And I'm more focused on Vue logic. Is everything displaying like it should be, that kind of thing.
So that's awesome. And you name dropped a ton of technologies there, and they all play like a super, super valid role. And this actually ties into a great question we just got from Twitch from Komodoko Combat, and I hope I said that correctly. But tech moves at light speed. How do you define legacy? So, and I kind of want to two-part this question. This may not be the original goal, but how do you define what is legacy? But then also, with all the new technology, how do you define what you actually want to use for your stack, basically? And Stephen, we'll start with you if you're good with that.
Okay, so I will say that defining legacy is an organizational difference everywhere you go, but I will give you my own personal. Legacy for me is usually defined by a technology that you are replacing 100%, right? It's going to be replaced. Therefore, it is a legacy. You are sunsetting it is another keyword that you'll hear often. And B, it's almost always in a different technology stack, right? So that could necessarily be in a similar technology, meaning like going from .NET 4.5 or 4.6 and then moving to .NET Core. Both are .NET, but very drastically different technologies. Or they could be going something from DevX, which is a component library in the .NET world, and then moving into something like a more core or in-house component library. And you have legacy, and it's usually those two parts for me. And I will say that, Aaron, what was the second part of the question as far as you said defining legacy?
Oh, and then kind of, so knowing what is legacy, meaning you likely may not want to use it for new stacks, and then knowing what you would want to use for new stacks? Like what would you consider to be modern, and how do you kind of adjust with that?
Well, every developer in the whole world will have their own opinion. It's usually, what do I want to develop in is really the question. And then usually you have camps. You have people who will fight for the fun, right? Like, I play the majority of my roles in the past 3 years have been architect positions. So I cannot afford to throw my own opinion in there. So I can tell you that question will be defined depending on your role. If you're a back end, normally you want stuff like what Matt has said, very structured, easily testable. You can pull stuff out in microservices. More front end centric people may want something that's really verbose, a lot of the JavaScript technologies and TypeScript, because they want to be able to pull from packages left and right. But I can tell you personally, from an architect's standpoint, I need something that will last, and I need something that is secure. And that usually leads almost all of my stuff. And I will say is cheaper, because .NET will last, and it's a great technology, but it is not cheap by any means. So technology stacks are heavily weighed on by development, but they're ultimately settled on by your management because of both cost and honestly, your current software that you're working on will be legacy later, and they want to know when that date will be, because that legacy overhaul is a cost. Everything you do is cost. So I guess if you're a junior developer and you're getting into this, I would say don't settle ever on one technology. The best analogy I've ever been given is most people hear jack of all trades, master of none, but the rest of that is more important, and that is better than most. So learn everything general wise, and then that way when you go to a new technology, which you will, you're not lost. You just kind of translate that knowledge from one to one. So that's kind of how I pick my technologies, but I definitely have my favorites, and I will always fight for them. But if they go away from that, then I don't know.
If it's okay for me to jump in,
yeah, for sure.
Kind of bring it back. So that book that I highly recommend, Working with Legacy Code, it really goes to kind of just describe it. And this is going to touch on some of the things that Steven actually said, that it's basically any code that you have in production. And it's Steven touched on it, because anytime you produce something, you're almost always creating something that we call technical debt. And once technical debt is there, you have to pay it off, meaning you have to get rid of it somehow. So it doesn't matter if I use the newest thing today, maybe next week there's a new exploit someplace out there, and I need to go back through and I have to refactor my things. And even 6 months is a long time for someone working on current code. And they're like, oh, 6 months ago, after all the fires I've been working on, what was this? So that's one part of it. It's something that you've made and put into production. Additionally, the other part would be, it doesn't have good unit testing around it or good end-to-end testing around it, meaning that you don't know what it does. If you can really thoroughly know what it does through testing and know what's broken and what's not, then I guess it wouldn't fall as much in the legacy scale as this was something that was on fire. We made a fix, we pushed it out, and it's there and it's working and it's been working, and now we have to change it, but I don't want to go back to that fire kind of thing. So that's kind of, for me, that's kind of where it's at. Languages, there are always going to be languages that are good at different things. Like the languages that are fun for me to program in, there are languages that are fun for other people to program in, there are languages that are good for a task. That is it's not fun for me, but I understand that in comparison to the language I use, this one is good for tasks. So it might be an old language, it might be a new language, it just depends. You kind of choose based on that. So it's really hard to just say based on language that it's legacy. People still use Perl. Perl still does good stuff. I will never program in Perl again. I don't like sigils. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's legacy. So
yeah, that's a good point, because some people do define legacy as a technology stack. Just because there are so many new JavaScript technologies, that doesn't mean that there aren't front end technologies that are older that aren't legacy. They're just not as talked about right now presently, but that's a good distinction. I like that.
Yeah, I can add a bit to that if you'd like.
Yeah.
So typically when I'm looking at technologies, I'll look at marketability too, right? Is there, are there developers for this? Perl developers, probably not many in Oklahoma. C# developers, there's a lot, right? And so if you can be hiring developers in this area, then you want to look at your market.
God dang, that is a fantastic point, Matt. Heck yeah.
Yeah. Other thing I'll look at, are big companies using this? I lean towards open source stacks that are being used by big companies because you have the whole community supporting it. You have access to the source code so you can see how it functions. Some other things I would look for is it oriented around testing, right? Do they have a focus on testing? When you go to the docs, do they have good docs on testing? And those are some of the key things I would look for.
How do you said something that I'm curious about, because I feel like everyone does this differently. But how do you know if a big company uses a certain technology stack? Just like a news article or something? Or
well, a lot of those tech stacks are proud that Walmart Labs or Amazon or Google are using their product, or Facebook. Facebook
so like that technology
will be badged on the on the homepage of the product.
Okay.
And to jump onto that, there's something that's really good to track called the TOB index, which is updated monthly. It's TOBIE, I believe it is. If you just type in programming index, they've been updating it for tens of years now. So they have a graph of programming language.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I have it on here. This is good stuff.
And every month they update it with the different trends. And it was, I believe it was like Java for a long time. And then you slowly see the trend for Java going down as well. And they really, whenever a language makes a jump, so when JavaScript made the jump from it was just this plaything to it is the language, they really talked about it. And that's a good place to go and look at it. And just to jump in with what Matt said, if you ever have to make decisions on language for your company, do it based on how easy is it going to be for us to get developers. Mm-hmm. There are some really cool languages out there that it's going to cost your company more to get developers in, and you don't want to leave your company holding that bag.
Yeah, it's true.
On the TOB index that you shared, Doji, I will actually give an affirmative to that. I have spoken with students in the past, and I'd like to use that to show, hey, this was a little bit ago, but you're learning Java in school right now. Despite whatever community is telling you, this is proof that these are valuable skills to be learning right now. And also on the flip side of that, I'll also add that Stack Overflow does an annual survey every year, and that's a great place to learn about.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to say representative of absolutely every developer out there, but a developer who might be active in the community out there. So I actually just used that the other day when I'm looking at a new project and I want to learn a new language. I kind of thought, is it going to be more valuable to learn Go or Rust? And more value is, they're different tools, and more value is of course subjective, but it kind of helps you answer some of those internal questions you have.
Yep.
So with the updating software here, we've talked about testing, we've talked a little bit about documentation, and we've talked a little bit about the planning, about what questions you need to ask beforehand. And let's jump ahead a little bit, and let's say that you as a company are ready to make that move. You've got your plan, your plans for how you're going to be implementing testing, and the documentation that you're going to be writing. So you are ready to make that first jump. There's a lot of things to consider here, whether that's, do I need to get this up quickly for an MVP? Do I need to think about this thoroughly and get a well-developed product before it ever gets shown? How many people are going to be on my team? I'm throwing out a lot of questions, but there's an infinite amount. And the big question is, when you are on a new project, and let's say it's a reasonably sized project, what are some of the first things that during the development process, and this can be interacting with other disciplines, what are some of the first things that you like to think about and have set once you've done your research? And we'll start with back with Matt on this one, kind of go the other way.
Yeah, sure. So something I'd be looking for is a strategy for getting quick feedback, right? So you're going to be making a bunch of changes to this massive legacy system. You want quick feedback on that. So I'd be looking at something like, do we have a beta test track group that we want to pilot this with, so that we can get quick feedback? And that's probably where I would start. But I'm sure, I don't have a ton of experience refactoring big legacy systems, so I'm sure you guys could probably speak to that better.
So what we're really focused on is spinning up the team and how to get the team going. Is that correct?
Just really anything involved in that. You're starting your developments. It could be a one-man project. It could be a 10-man project. And I'm using man as person there. So just kind of anything that you think about when you're actively building something. That's kind of what we're talking about here.
So on projects like that, company deadlines tend to be a big driving factor on what's going on and how much human resources they're going to toss at the problem. That's the first one. You're also going to have a diverse array of developers. There are going to be some that know a lot about it, some that know not so much about it. There's also the problem, is it a complete replace or is it an upgrade? And those take slightly different skills. A complete replace is easier because now you're working with something called greenfield production. And greenfield production means you can do lots of things. You can make code that is testable, where a legacy code might not have been designed to be testable. So despite how much they say we want tests, well, it wasn't designed to be testable in the first place, so we can't test it.
Yeah.
And then getting the team spun up, basically the biggest thing for me is get everyone environments that they can break as fast as possible. If you're able to break the environment safely, without fear, and then spin it back up to a state that it was before, then everyone's going to learn really quickly and really fast and know how to move forward.
I feel like someone's about to mention containers.
I love containers.
I know you do.
It always ends in every discussion. Always has to have the word Docker in it.
Yep. It's,
Docker Kubernetes. That's great. Containers.
give me my safe place. Like, this is my safe place. Leave me alone.
But even without that, just if you have an engineering team in the back that says, you guys, we've made 3 databases for you. If you mess up one, you can fall back to another one. Here are the connection strings to connect to a new database. We'll fix the other one, and then you can go back to using it, as long as there's that way to go back to what it was before. Being able to break things is very empowering in the space of computers in general. Once you've understood that I can break it and recover, then it's easy to explore. And I think that's going to be a really big factor in being able to spin things up.
I like that. I honestly, I get in my head so much about the planning stages for so long. And, you know, Matt was actually the one we were talking a couple of years ago about this. And I never even knew it as a thing. And now it's like, I can't not think about this, but for people who have never, this is not our field. This is just working in general. But like, I get serious imposter syndrome when I work on new projects, even if I've been at the company for years, it doesn't matter, because it's so new, right? I was so comfortable with everything I was doing, and now I'm starting something new. It's like, oh crap, right? Like, I have all this, I put this pressure on myself, and I feel like I'm not going to be able to perform to my own expectations. And so I have found over the years that no matter if you have 100-person team or if it's just me solo, get something out fast. And just that's the best way to understand it, because then while you're breaking something, because Dodgy hit the nail on the head, like I learn by failure, and I think that's the fastest way I can fail fast is to just start doing something. You know, it's not perfect. I will say though, however, being cautious with showing your prototype or showing your whatever it is you're making, right, too soon, because first off, you cannot judge business, as I use that as a general umbrella, business, from getting excited from what they see. But more often than not, given those deadlines that Dodgy had mentioned earlier, sometimes your prototype ends up not being a prototype very quickly. And since you were learning, me personally, from failure, it's not your best quality work. And then now you're paying your tech debt as you're developing at the same time, and it can be a very difficult, Sisyphus sort of like example where you're just constantly pushing that problem further and further up. But that's my process is get something out, just code, just start it today. And without the fear of knowing that you could just throw that away. But in the end, you still have that knowledge and you still have that experience, and you have those failures and you can grow from them. So, it's the most difficult thing to do, I feel, for most developers, but setting your pride aside and realizing that like this thing you just made could just be thrown away, but that's okay because it's called development. It's not called done. So you just start over again the next day. So
I like that a lot. Called development, not done.
I wish I could take credit for that, but I saw the the creator, the founder of C++ in Dallas many years ago, and that's what he said. That's actually the only thing from his talk I remember. And I was like, this guy's a genius. I want to be just like him when I grow up.
That's awesome. I actually listened to a podcast that involved the talk about C, not even C++ recently. So it's, you're talking about, I know we talked about legacy code earlier, but just because something is old doesn't mean it's legacy. It's all about what your process is and what your needs are. I guarantee you that, especially for lower level type stuff, whether that's game development or not, some of like C and some of your older school technologies are way catered to that.
People forget that literally all of your old compiler, like your original compilers and technologies that you use every day to run your newer technologies are still fundamentally built in those older technologies. And I'm like, you have to give those credit where credit's due. You don't have to like those things and program in them, but they're not going anywhere.
I wanted to tag team with Matt on something, if that's okay. That's kind of related to SpinUp, especially since working at Bison. One thing that we kind of missed is probably if we go into Scrum and Agile too much, it's going to take the topic off completely. But we're in this stage where we're breaking software and we're trying to understand what to do. We understand what the requirements are, but we don't understand how to get there, and we don't have a plan. And it's also dangerous to make an upfront plan. That's called waterfall. So to make an upfront plan when you don't know everything, like we haven't surveyed the land, we haven't done any of that. So as your team is breaking stuff, you'll make stories and start to come up with a picture of what can we do and how fast can we do it. I just wanted to get kind of, Matt, your thoughts, like working at Bison and the speed that you guys go and everything like that.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of follow lean startup methodology in that, if you don't know the problem, you're not going to provide the best solution, right? You're not going to provide a solution. You may provide a solution, nobody's going to want it, right? And so I put a ton of value in iterating over the problem first, right? And so before it even gets to development, right, the product team could go out and do product discovery. They could do solution hypothesis, and then start working on product solution fit. And they can create prototypes, low code, no code prototypes. And so to really isolate the problems and the solution that we need to be working on, right? And so when you do those low code, no code solutions, you're saving dev man hours, right? So as a system grows, it acquires entropy, right? And the more features you add, the more, you might be chasing features, but the more you add, it adds entropy to the system and the more complexity that you'll add to the system. And as those things grow, it tends to be, if you have good engineers, it's like a linear progression, but if you don't, then it's more exponential. And so your systems become harder to work on. And so if you don't know the problem, I would have your product team focus on figuring out exactly what the problem is. And then the most valuable solution, right? Like what solution can I offer these people today? And they would just buy my product, right? And oftentimes you have to do it in a roundabout way, right? Because if you ask someone, hey, if I give you this feature, would you buy my product? They're going to say yes. But then when it comes down to brass tacks, they may not even buy the product, right? And so maybe your marketing department, creates a fake campaign that says, hey, here's our new product. It provides just this web page, and the web page highlights all these features that you could add, right? That add value to the user's daily life, right? And so maybe they track how many people click on that product, right? And send that marketing campaign out to potential users. And so those are roundabout ways that you can figure out what problem you need to be working on and figure out what solutions you need to be offering before you spend development hours. And that's kind of how I would approach it personally.
When you say low code, no code, is there any technologies or something that specifically, like, is it you're talking like from a design perspective, like Figma, or more of like, I say development because you said, development hours, but like, Google does Python, just trying to like be able to like pump out prototypes like with minuscule amounts of code, but like, or even just, paper prototyping and drawing stuff out and throwing out some stills. So
yeah, I mean, you could have a whole mocked up solution that doesn't actually do anything, but it collects feedback from users, right? And you don't want to always put your company name on something like that, but you can use it for market research and figure out what exactly you should be doing, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And
I saw PDF. I didn't even know PDFs could be clickable in a way that, like, if you maximize them almost like a PowerPoint presentation, that you could email a PDF because everyone knows how to open one, and they all are able to, no matter what device they are, and then they click around and they're like, oh yeah, this is what I want, or no, this is not what I want.
Yeah, another solid strategy is, mechanical turkeying it, right? So you have this web form. It provides this.
Did you say a mechanical turkey?
Mechanical Turk? It's a
Oh,
term. So like,
I've never heard of this.
yeah. So like you provide this web form and it looks like it's this full functioning app that has all these really cool algorithms and it provides all this value to the user. But really, once you click submit, it's like actual people in the background. If you have plenty of runway and you have plenty of capital, you pay people, and that's one way that you could explore if your problem and solutions are the right ones, right?
Okay.
And then
I got you.
once you've proved that there's value there, then you move it into product development, right? And that's one way that you could save a ton of headache for developers, because if you just start adding these features to the product as you go, then you're going to end up with this big bloated thing that has a ton of entropy that's hard to move quick. And like one of the most important things a startup has is the ability to pivot and move quick, right? So like successful startups, the one thing they all have in common is that they've pivoted multiple times from their original idea and the original problem and solution. And so that's how I'd approach it.
I really like that, because one of the first companies I joined it was about a decade ago. That's what they did. Like it's exactly, I didn't know Mechanical Turk or Turkey was like even a thing, but it's a perfect definition, because that's what they did. They OCR'd manually EOBs for healthcare companies. And then they hired development staff to pretty much automate those hand keyers, is what we called them. Till after I left, 3 or 4 years later, that like they went from a keying staff of like 40 to like 5. And those 5 were only doing those edge case EOBs that were like unlegible. But for the most part, like it's what you said, they go, yeah, there's a product here and we're paying keyers, and then ultimately let's put that money, and they just kind of slowly shifted it over the course of 3 years to automation. And I think now they do everything with machine learning to where they have little to no keyers the keyers are really just checking the machines to make sure they're not, learning too much. So, but yeah, I love those definitions. That's pretty cool.
All right, awesome. Well, hey, I'm going to start closing this one out. We're about at time, and I want to thank everyone for coming. But I do have one last major question that I want to give everybody a chance to answer. And the question is for anyone, a lot of us have been on this call. We've been doing this for a while, and the things that we've all talked about, like Steven, you mentioned imposter syndrome and more. There's a lot more involved in our field. We're kind of aware of that, and we just know how to deal with it. But if you're new in the field, there's a lot that you don't really know. Like what are some of the assumptions that are understood in the tech field that don't get taught in school, that you kind of learn on the job and all that? And I'm going to go first to give everyone a chance to kind of think about that. But I want to zone in on that imposter syndrome and say that our field is very well known for thinking that you have to like know what you're doing all the time. And I think, social media is awesome, but it also really plays to the dark side of that. Like if you go to Reddit or Hacker News, you can easily think, oh man, all these people are doing these awesome things that I don't know how to do. Like you kind of start getting a little bit negative on yourself. And I just want to be clear to anyone joining the field or, relatively new to it, that's not normal. Like we still look up syntax for everything. Like if I'm defining a variable, like syntax, and that's normal. You
regex.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know everything. What you start to learn are what questions to ask, and then you ask the internet, and then knowing what to do based on those answers. And knowing what to do doesn't mean that you have to do it. It could be like, okay, I need to get with this other person who's more talented in this area to see what they would do. So I want to call that out, that we are being an expert or being a senior doesn't mean you know everything. It means you just kind of know what the next step is, and then what the next step to go after that is. So I want to kind of open up, like if you want to share anything to junior developers or someone who's new in the field. Yeah, Steven, let's start with you and then go Doji and end with Matt.
Mine's actually pretty easy. Learning how to say I don't know. That's it. That was the biggest thing for me, and it is by far the most powerful tool I have ever used. And learning to say I don't know, when to say it, is difficult, and even now. So I work with the most brilliant developers in the United States, because I work all around the nation. And I think saying I don't know has really made it easier for me to start a conversation with someone, because there's one thing I know is when you say I don't know, there's a fear that makes you look dumb. But really what that does is that you are acknowledging that this person you're saying I don't know to has more knowledge than you, and hopefully we'll start a conversation. I can tell you, I don't think there's ever been a time I said I don't know and it went negatively. Like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't deserve a promotion. Let's fire him. And if it is, I'll be honest with you, if that ever does happen, I don't really want to work there, because if that's how you're going to reward ignorance, then that just means that no one's going to say that I don't know. And that's really dangerous. So yeah, it's a very easy concept to talk about, but it's a very difficult conversation to have with yourself.
I guess for me, it would be a few, probably three. The first one is, I believe, I always go back to Harry Potter for this one, but everyone's calling him He Who Shall Not Be Named, and it's really Voldemort. And then Dumbledore comes out and says you should call it by its name because there's power in knowing a name. And it just kind of ties back to what Aaron said. Like, once you know the name for what you want to do, there's a similar way to do it in other languages. Like, I've been doing some things in JavaScript recently at work, and I'm not a JavaScript master, but I do a whole bunch in C#, and I've been doing C# for years. I'm like, oh, I want to do a for each. There has to be a for each construct in JavaScript, and understanding that it's called a for each, being able to search for it that way, that's really powerful, so that you find the quick way to get to your answers. I think that's the first one. So understanding just what the names of things are and how to get to an answer, use the internet. Way back in the day, before the internet, we had to go to books. So you had to go to the library to find a book, hope that book had the information in it. Like, people were still doing it. It just wasn't obvious. And the internet's just made it easier. You don't have to go to the library for everything. So
yeah, you can't control F paper. I'm just like, I can't tell you how many times I've been like at a library and I'm like, can I just control F can I OCR this book first and then look for my answer? Like, ugh, paper.
I can add. Oh,
Go ahead, Matt.
well, if you're not done, I'll wait. Go ahead.
Oh, and then I was going to say the next one is a lot of you, if you're just coming out of school, like, you have your algorithms and all these things that you do, and it's all math. But once you get into like production, there is math. There's always going to be math. There are things that you do calculations, but strings are the most crazy powerful thing in programming, and they don't get enough credit because you don't work with them as much as you need to. Like, you can string everything. You want to have the biggest number that a computer can't hold. You can hold it in a string, and then you can do some crazy things on that string and go from there. Would be the last one. And then after that, my final one would be just always, keep learning. Like, the learning doesn't stop. You have to have fun ways to learn, whether it's like a small side project, or if it's getting a whole bunch of free videos off of a site that teaches Vue because they had a free weekend and you decided to automate and download all the videos. I mean, that's just something, to learn. So just do fun things like that.
Yeah, I would touch on Steven's point about not knowing. Like, the key differentiator in my mind between, a senior developer and a junior developer is knowing when to say I don't know and ask questions and ask for help. Because developers are typically very kind with their time, at least that's my experience. And so if you ask someone, they are more than happy to explain it to you in detail, so that they can make you better and you grow faster as a result. And so you guys can just feed off of each other and grow together, right? Because, you're new to this, you're going to teach that senior developer something you didn't know about the latest version of JavaScript or whatever, right? And so, learning from each other has a ton of value, but you have to put your ego aside and know when to say, I don't know. The other thing is, like, passion. Show people your passion. If you're wanting to get into this industry, passion is like one of the key indicators for me if you're going to be successful. Because if you don't really enjoy software development, then it's a really hard job, and you might eventually fall off. And so most of the good developers I've worked with have been very passionate about what they do. For some good resources, if you're getting into this, I would look at the book Clean Code by Martin Fowler, I believe it is. And another good one is The Pragmatic Programmer. And so one of the things that those two books will kind of teach you to do is look at systems at a higher level, and not, they're kind of agnostic to the version or language that you're using. And so those are a good place to start to get, a better understanding of, how to write software.
I plus one.
Just real quick, something that Matt said is to put a definition to some of the things he might have said is community knowledge versus coveted knowledge. And I I can speak from working on a lot of legacy projects, because that's quite literally who hire me. That's my job, right? Like they hire in someone to help fix, because they can fire me if the prototype fails. So when it comes to community knowledge, a newer generation has realized that it is much better to have open source, have documentation that's available to everyone, conversations like we've all talked about here today. You guys have mentioned good reading material, but older generations, and that's not to knock them, they had companies that coveted knowledge and then kept it to themselves. So they learned that if you want to keep your job, you keep your mouth shut, and that's not where the industry is going. So just know that it's changing drastically. I can tell you 10 years ago, there were developers that when I was a junior developer, I'd ask them, I don't know what that means. And they were just like, okay, then why did we hire you? And I was like, oh no, I picked the wrong field. And now when I talk about that, I have people ask me, how did you do that? And just like Matt said, like, if you get me started up about something I enjoy talking about, I will never shut up. Like, you can ask my wife. We will go out for drinks and I'll see someone I know and she's like, I'm going to go over here while you talk about nerdy stuff. So for sure, passion, Matt. I think that's a great thing to talk about.
I wanted to give a +1 on the Clean Code book. I've read it several times. It's
for sure
an excellent book.
Plus, I think he has a blog too, where he talks about his concepts on certain languages and how they can kind of translate and stuff too. I'll have to find that and I'll post that into chat.
It's Robert Martin, not Robert Fowler. I messed up the name, but.
Well, hey, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the panel today, and thanks everyone who tuned in on the stream. We got a great showing today. Awesome way to kick out the new year, and we'll get these up on YouTube as well. Make sure, so once again, thanks everyone for Matt Woodruff, Doji Giacomo, and Stephen Vincent. You can find them all on Techlahoma Slack. We have our own channels for OKC Web Devs, and any channels, of course, Slack is open. Find them on LinkedIn. I'm sure any other social medias that you all want to plug.
No, I'm the worst millennial. I barely even use Instagram to look at cars, so I don't really have social media.
Well, good deal. So yeah, make sure you give them a round of applause at home, in your office, or wherever you might be. And just a reminder, we'll be back in February next month. I'll have to look at the date. It's the third Tuesday of the month is typically what we do. But we'll plan for lightning talks. So if that sounds interesting to you, please contact myself, Aaron Krause in Slack, or Stephen Vincent. We have the UG OKC Web Devs open group on Slack. UG stands for user group. So again, if you've been doing this for 0 months or 10 years, doesn't matter. Like, we want to hear from you, because there's a lot of cool stuff. I think we've addressed every question from Twitch just throughout the course of this talk. So thanks everyone for asking questions. And I think that's it. You'll see us on social media. We'll be back in February. We'll see if March is feasible for an in-person meeting, but don't hold us to that. We're definitely not holding us to that. We'll make the safest and the best decision. So that's it. Thanks everyone, and we will catch you all at the next meetup.
Thanks, guys.